It's a Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and Memphis embarrassed themselves against the New York Knicks on Monday night. We're going to talk about on this episode how this is the most important stretch of the season for the Memphis Grizzlies. And if that is indeed true, if I am correct, they laid a big fat egg. We're going to talk about that, plus some positivity. Jaren Jackson Jr. being named the Western Conference Player of the Week for last week. It's a new week, unfortunately, and the Grizzlies started off with a loss. We're going to talk about all of that and more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode of the podcast. You know what that means. Host, no DeMichael Cole. He has a well-deserved day off. I am flying solo to talk about the nightmare that was Grizzlies, Knicks, and more on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. Thanks for reminding me, FanDuel. And there is no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app, head to FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies each and every time that an episode drops. We will be taking tomorrow off. The Grizzlies have a 3-game week, have a couple days off here. DeMichael and I are going to take advantage of that. We will be back with you for a Houston Rockets preview episode of the show on Thursday. So there will not be a Wednesday episode this week. There will still be a fan newsletter, though, a free newsletter, I should say, a free daily newsletter each and every day. LockedOnDaily.com. Go and click on the Locked On Grizzlies tab. Subscribe to get Grizzlies written words from me, NBA at large words from all sorts of different folks. You obviously have fantasy basketball advice there as well. So again, LockedOnDaily.com. Get our free daily newsletter. The podcast might be taking a day off on Wednesday, but there will be a newsletter in your inbox Wednesday. So make sure you are subscribing. I don't know where to begin with the Grizzlies' performance on Monday night against the New York Knicks. I wrote about it for the newsletter today, and I do believe it. And we'll talk more about it later on in the show. I'll give my reasons why. This is the most important stretch of the season for the Memphis Grizzlies right now. And it started last night. It started last night for the Grizzlies of Memphis, the Bears of Beale Street. And the Bears looked like Cubs against the New York Knicks. That was probably, I've watched every Grizzlies game, just about every Grizzlies game, highlights of a couple that were late night on the West Coast. Watched almost every Grizzlies game this year. That was probably the most embarrassing loss that the Memphis Grizzlies have taken so far this year. And it's not because of who they lost to. The New York Knicks are an Eastern Conference contender, right? The Cleveland Cavaliers obviously are going to have a lot to say about what happens in the Eastern Conference. The Boston Celtics, to be the man, you got to beat the man. They are the reigning defending champs. They're going to have something to say. The Knicks are going to have something to say too. That is a darn good basketball team. Losing to the New York Knicks is not the problem. It's how they lost to the New York Knicks. Memphis was in the game despite not playing their best. They were only down 8 at halftime. Memphis was down 3 at the end of the first quarter. Memphis was down 8 at the end of the first half. Then the second half started, and the Grizzlies forgot how to defend. The New York Knicks scored 83 points in the second half against the Memphis Grizzlies. 83 points. Memphis was outscored 54-83 in the second half. You heard me correctly. That is embarrassing. And it's easy to point fingers at Taylor Jenkins. There are obvious things that you can criticize about that guy in terms of his rotations. The offense gets criticism, which I find humorous because this is literally like the 6th best scoring offense in league history right now. So sure, if you want to criticize the scheme, it doesn't work against good teams. Maybe that's true. Taylor Jenkins' rotations, again, 11 guys get minutes. And again, it's 11 guys before garbage time. Like Jay Huff and John Conchar, they get 4 minutes of garbage time at the end of the contest. But it was an 11-man rotation before garbage time. You want to criticize that? I can hear that. But at some point, the players have to wear these struggles. At some point, Desmond Bane, who is not a point guard, has played really well at times. When you say that you want to compete for a championship, when Jaren Jackson Jr., who we'll talk about later on in the show, goes on national television and says it's a championship, that's the goal. Okay, we're going to hold you to that standard. 6 turnovers, 4 assists. Not good enough, Desmond Bane. That's not good enough. 4 turnovers, 2 assists. Not good enough, Joe Morant. 10 points on 13 shots. Not good enough, Joe Morant. Your starting backcourt had 10 turnovers and 6 assists. That is not going to cut it. You need more from those guys. Period, point blank. Joe Morant is frustrated. You can see it watching the games. He is mad that he is not getting contact calls, that he's not getting fouls called. For me, if that's a place that you want to be mad at Taylor Jenkins because he's not losing his mind at this point, that his superstar point guard is not able to draw contact calls, okay, I would hear that. I said it on X during the game. Now would be a good time for Taylor Jenkins to lose his mind, to lose his marbles. He didn't do it. But again, you can't just blame the coach. The coach doesn't play. Ja has to continue to put his head down, draw contact, be savvy, find ways to work around the ways that the officiating is going against him. Is that entirely fair? Absolutely not. Do I think Ja Morant has a point? You better believe it. But he has no control over that. He has no control over the officiating. He has control over the way he responds to it. And his body language sucked against the New York Knicks. He allowed for it to get to him. He's one of the leaders of this team, arguably the leader of the team. You cannot have that happen. That energy permeates, it feeds, it festers, and it became a self-fulfilling prophecy in the second half. Morant struggled. Bane struggled. But to be honest with you, the 2 rookies struggled as well. Another reason that I don't want to put all of this at the feet of Taylor Jenkins is he made a halftime adjustment. Again, Memphis was only down 8 at the half. Zach Edey did not look right in this game. The matchup was off. DeMichael and I talked about that on yesterday's show. If you're an everydayer, you heard me and him discussing it. If we were worried about Steven Adams having trouble with Karl Anthony Towns, it made sense to worry about Zach Edey having those same troubles, and he most certainly did. So what does Taylor Jenkins do? He makes an adjustment. Brandon Clark comes in, Zach Edey goes out. You could very easily argue that the 5 best players on the Memphis Grizzlies this season have been Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jalen Wells, Jaren Jackson Jr., Brandon Clark. Those are your starters, and they got smoked like a pork shoulder. They got cooked like an apple pie in the Big Apple. The city that never sleeps didn't take a nap in this one because they whipped the Grizzlies up and down that court, especially in the second half, and it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. The body language was embarrassing. The way that they carried themselves in the second half was embarrassing. And I'm comfortable saying that as a lowly podcaster and newsletter writer because Brevin Knight, who is the play-by-play voice, who is the analyst for that team on television, and Pete Pranica, the play-by-play voice on television, both said the exact same thing. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. You cannot say that you are a contender, that you are really trying to go for this, and then put forth the effort on that stage and that moment that the Memphis Grizzlies did. You just can't. You just can't. So are the Grizzlies a good regular season team? Yeah, they're a good regular season team. Are they going to be a top 3 seed, top 4 seed in the Western Conference? Yeah. I think they'll host a first-round series. If they play the way they did on Monday against the Denver Nuggets, against the Los Angeles Clippers with a healthy Kawhi Leonard, who doesn't have to play in back-to-backs in a playoff series, the Memphis Grizzlies will lose in the first round. And that might be the end of the Taylor Jenkins era. That might lead to larger changes around the Bane, Morant, Jackson Jr. core. There might be serious ramifications if what happened on Monday happens again. The good news? There's more basketball to be played. There's time to bounce back. But if this is the most significant stretch of basketball for the Grizzlies this season that just started on Monday night, it did not start well. It just didn't, and that's the reality. There's no way to sugarcoat that. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know how you're feeling coming out of Grizzlies Knicks. Again, you could blame everybody. I think Jenkins could have done some things better, but Jenkins didn't lose that second half in that way. He made an adjustment the players didn't execute. At some point, they have to bear some of the brunt of this as well. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, a positive spin, a positive thing to discuss. Jaren Jackson Jr. being named the Western Conference Player of the Week, his first such honor of his career. We'll talk about that next, coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. It's been a tough couple days, for me and my sports teams. The Commanders get blown out on Sunday. The Grizzlies get blown out on Monday. Super Bowl 59 is still coming, however. It's one game with two teams and endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easier to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. Live betting features allow for you to stay involved no matter what happens on the field. The app is easy to navigate, and you can know that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets to the Super Bowl. That is icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official partner of Super Bowl 59. Check them out today. On a positive note, Jaren Jackson Jr. was easily, in my opinion, the best starter against the New York Knicks. 21 points on 14 shots, made 3 threes. Not his best game, right? I think he'd be the first one to admit that. But if you watch the contest, you didn't watch it and see Jaren Jackson Jr. as a major reason why the Grizzlies struggled. Of the 5 starters, to me, he's the one that showed up the most, all right? Shouldn't surprise us because Jaren has been showing up all season long, and he most certainly showed up last week, which is exactly why, and this is from a press release from the Memphis Grizzlies PR department. The NBA today announced that Memphis Grizzlies forward/center Jaren Jackson Jr. was named the Western Conference Player of the Week for games played Monday, January 20th through Sunday, January 26th. This marks the first Career Player of the Week award for Jackson Jr., guided Memphis to a 4-0 record with averages of 25.8 points, 6.3 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1.5 blocks, and 31.2 minutes played. The Grizzlies were the only NBA team to go 4-0 last week, extending the NBA's longest active winning streak to 6 games. This is obviously a dated email because that winning streak is over, and tying the team's longest winning streak of the season. That tie is maintained. Jaren led the West in plus minus per game, plus 17.5, and ranked 3rd in the NBA in net rating among players who average at least 25 minutes per game, behind Wells and Morant, ironically. Jackson Jr. scored at least 20 points and shot 50% or better in all 4 games, recording his 4th double-double of the season in the MLK Day game victory over the Minnesota Timberwolves. He also dished out 7 assists against the Pelicans. Jaren has had a career year. Nobody is disputing that. And it's a well-timed career year, right? DeMichael and I have talked a lot about Jaren's potential for being up for a contract extension. And that's coming, whether it's this summer, next summer, those conversations will arrive. And as we've talked about on this show, it is probably better for Memphis to have Jaren get all those accolades now so that an extension makes more sense in the here and now. And Jaren won't necessarily have to wait to get the rewards of the fruit of his labor for another year. It would behoove the Grizzlies to knock that extension out this summer. Okay? So you want Jaren to have all this success. Even beyond being a fan, it's probably what's best for the Grizzlies organization at this point to get that contract signed. Jaren is almost certainly going to be second team All-NBA, right? And I agree with Sam Vecini. We talked about this last week. He's closer to first team than he is third. Now, will he be first team? I don't think so. I think you have to reward the Thunders and Cavaliers, Knicks of the world. You know, there's teams that are better in front of Memphis that have really good players. I don't think Jaren is top 5. I do believe he's top 10. I think you'd be hard-pressed to name 9 or 10 guys that are better in the NBA this season than Jaren Jackson Jr. that are meeting the criteria to be selected for All NBA. Jaren is pairing availability, which is one of the greatest abilities out there, with production. He is producing on both ends of the floor. He is having a career year scoring the ball. He is back to being one of the best defenders in the NBA. He'll make an all-defensive team, but I also think he's going to make the All-NBA team as well, probably second team. And that is a testament to the work he's put in, the development of the coaches and the strength program. He's 6'11", 245 pounds. He is a unique, he's like if Giannis and Kristaps Porzingis had a baby, right? In terms of his unique frame, the way that he utilizes that frame, how he scores the basketball, obviously more of a three-point threat than Giannis, more of a physical downhill threat than Kristaps Porzingis. But at the same time, both of those guys, especially Giannis, have more of a pedigree and have been doing it for longer, right? But Jaren is 100% in the All-NBA mix. And his success has led to an interesting dynamic in terms of Memphis now having two superstar level players, right? And I don't think that it's a thing in terms of chemistry. I'm not trying to say that, but I do think it's interesting to watch and see how Ja Morant continues to interact with the situation at hand. Not that Ja, I don't think that's the body language issue. I truly believe Ja is pissed off that he's not getting foul calls. That's why Ja is having the current issues that he's having. I do think Ja's unselfish nature as a player lends itself to him being glad that Jaren is having this come up and doing these things. It's help for Ja Morant, right? But how it works on the court, Ja not being that guy who demands the ball, set me a screen and let me work. It's still happening, but it's certainly not happening at the level that it was before because of Jaren's evolution offensively. At times, you see Jaren being the guy pointing to folks to cut to the other end of the court and let him go to work in an isolation situation. Jaren is doing that just as much, if not more, than Ja Morant. And that, again, lends itself to an interesting question. How do you balance that offensively? How do you balance that in terms of allowing for both of those guys to thrive? Because it's been talked about here, there, and everywhere. I've been talking about it for years. For whatever reason, the games of Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. in terms of two-man game, pick and roll, pick and pop, the actual playing together as a duo has not been as fruitful as you would expect it to be. They work well with each other and around each other in other lineups. But you would not say that Jaren and Ja are a two-man game like Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. You wouldn't say that like you would De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. The connection is not the same. And I do think that dynamic shifting with Ja missing so much time over the last year or so, obviously not as much of this season, still missing time, but he's played more than he did last year. With Jaren's arrival as a NBA, all-NBA player, how that meshes and vibes with getting Ja to a place where this team needs him to be, that matters a lot. But we can talk more about Ja another time on a future episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I do want to give credit and kudos to Jaren Jackson Jr., who, when he was drafted in 2018, there was some scattered boos at FedEx Forum. I was there. I was in the building. I heard them. Not because they thought Jaren was going to be a bad basketball player, because I didn't boo because I was working for Grizzly Bear Blues, but I was concerned. He was a project. We still thought that this was a Marc Gasol, Mike Conley. That was the window. We were trying to compete. Jaren was going to be a project. That's what he was sold as. The project, they've aced it. And again, Jaren deserves the most credit for that as the player that's developed his talent, his abilities. But Taylor Jenkins, who has been criticized for his rotations fairly at times, you have to give Taylor Jenkins credit for the development of Jaren Jackson Jr. I remember when Jenkins was hired, and he said he saw Jaren as a Giannis-esque kind of physical player that could hunt mismatches against almost any opponent. That's exactly where we are with Jaren now. He is a mismatch hunter. He's a mismatch take advantage of her. He is a game wrecker. And he is, this season, the best player on the Memphis Grizzlies. So congratulations to Jaren Jackson Jr. on the award. I'm sure at this moment he does not care as much about it because of the way Monday night's game went, but reflection is important. It's a good honoring of what Jaren has become as a basketball player. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will close out this Tuesday edition of the show talking about my newsletter for today. This is the most important stretch of the Grizzlies season. Off to a bit of a bad start. Hopefully it improves. We'll talk about ways that can happen coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stick around. Welcome back, to Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode. No DeMichael Cole. Friendly reminder, we will not have an episode tomorrow, taking advantage of the 2 days off for Memphis. We're going to do the same thing here on Locked On Grizzlies. There will still be a newsletter on Wednesday, but no episode of the show, no video on YouTube, no podcast. So you'll get us back on Thursday, DeMichael and I both together. We'll preview Houston. I'm sure there'll be a practice on Wednesday. DeMichael will probably have some words from that, some things to discuss, I'm sure, coming out of those conversations. Barring a trade or some sort of significant move, we're going to take Wednesday off and be back Thursday. I wrote for the newsletter today how this is the most significant stretch of the season for the Memphis Grizzlies. The actual title was "The Most Important Stretch of the Grizzlies Season Has Begun." And I truly believe that. I believe that to be fact, because this is a stretch where we're going to find out who the Memphis Grizzlies are. Started poorly against the Knicks, a really terrible close on Monday, but it can still turn around. The reason it's so important, though, is threefold. Number one, and again, this is from the newsletter, check it out, lockedondaily.com. The quality of opponent is high. You have the Houston Rockets on Thursday. That'll be the next episode we have for you. Again, taking off Wednesday, be back Thursday. DeMichael and I will preview Grizzlies Houston. That matters. The Rockets are up 3-0 on Memphis. They already have the tiebreaker. It's the last time the Grizzlies will see the Rockets. And it's a nationally televised game. So it's a chance for Memphis to get up off the mat after being knocked down by the Knicks and showing that they can compete with a team that is very similar to the New York Knicks in terms of their size and their physicality. But over the next 12 games or so, Memphis is going to see the Clippers. They're going to see the Magic. They're going to see the Cavaliers, the Thunder, the Phoenix Suns twice. There are only two teams over the next 12 or so games that are actively not interested as an organization in winning. San Antonio Spurs, Toronto Raptors. And those games are coming up relatively early in the stretch. So you're not seeing a run of the Timberwolves being the best team you play in a week. You are about to see some of the very best teams that the NBA has to offer. The Cavs and the Thunder being 1 and 2, literally, or the flip-flop them if you want, 1A and 1B in the entire association. They are going to be tested early and often. So that's reason number one. The quality of opponents, the strength of schedule is going up. Number two, of course, the trade deadline's included, right? You have the trade deadline coming up next week. What does Memphis do? When they play the way they did against the New York Knicks, they don't look like a team that is ready to contend for the NBA Finals. They just don't. The Knicks exposed them. At least on that night, the Grizzlies looked like a pretender, not a contender. Zach Kleiman, Grizzlies GM, is not an idiot, right? He is paid and paid well to have this team in a position to compete. He certainly saw what occurred on Monday night. What is your response to it? That is the question if you're Zach Kleiman. For me, my response is that you cannot be a true contender and have two rookies starting. Just can't happen. And that's not to put the blame at the feet of the rookies. It's not their fault. They're playing above and beyond realistic expectations, especially the guy who's playing better this season, Jalen Wells. But Edey's having a good year too, even with some of the struggles that he had on Monday. They're both playing well. Wells better than Edey. But they're rookies. You say that you're a championship contender. You need a starter in one of those spots. Maybe they're on the roster. Maybe it's Marcus Smart. Maybe it's Vince Williams Jr. Maybe it's Brandon Clark. Maybe you want to go that route. You can make a logical argument for that. But I also think you can make an argument that this team needs the roster to be condensed a little bit. It's a little too deep. Again, why are they running an 11-man rotation? I think it's fair to question that 100% from Taylor Jenkins. It's time to condense things a little bit. And I also believe that you're in a position where you have the assets to really kind of turn up the intensity on this year. Shake things up a little bit. Show the players that you are committed to this being a season where you want to contend. If you stand pat going into the trade deadline, or you do a small move with just Jake LaRavia's expiring deal because you didn't pick up his option, does that move the needle enough? I think that's a fair concern and a fair question. For me, the starting lineup has been really successful. Stats came out from NBA.com and their power rankings, how the Grizzlies are now qualified with their starting five. They played over 100 minutes together. Best plus minus since the Warriors' death lineup, okay, back in the mid-2010s, 2000-aughts, whatever you call it. The Durant and Curry and Thompson and Green era. That's great. Good for them. It doesn't look like it against teams like the Knicks and the Rockets. So how do you correct that? I think that's something they look into. Do you stand pat? Do you make a move? The trade deadline will obviously impact what this team looks like beyond next Thursday. And then the third thing that I wrote about in the newsletter was the fact that the schedule is kind of crazy, including the Knicks loss this past Monday, and this is directly from the newsletter. Memphis will play 12 games in 12 different cities, not 12 games in 12 days or anything like that. It's important to point out that the All-Star break is a part of this as well. But Memphis has no homestands. The 3 games that they play at FedEx Forum between now and February 25th are one-offs. So the city may be their home city, but they're still traveling a lot, going to different cities. And this week, the reason that we don't have an episode tomorrow, rest isn't an issue, right? The Grizzlies don't play again until Thursday, and then after that, they don't play again until Sunday. But going into the trade deadline, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday games. Then coming out of the All-Star break, it's 3 games in 4 days. How is that going to be managed, especially by a head coach who is playing 11-man rotations right now? And then you would imagine over the next week or two, we'll get updates on guys like Marcus Smart, Vince Williams Jr. How do they fit into the rotation? Where are these guys going to go? Who do you bump out of that mix? How do you integrate those pieces that, again, especially in the case of Smart, but also Vince Williams Jr., they were viewed as important contributors going into this campaign? How does Taylor Jenkins juggle all of that with a schedule that's going to involve a lot of travel? So between the challenging schedule, the strength of that schedule rising considerably, the travel that Memphis is going to have to go through, obviously the All-Star break, a week off is coming. The way that they're handled the trade deadline and the questions that are going to surround that. Again, we're choosing to not address the Jimmy Butler nonsense. He was suspended again by the Heat. I don't think Memphis wants him. I think it's coming out of left field. I don't get the vibe that it's an actual thing involving the Grizzlies. Maybe they're trying to get leverage, trying to find a way to make it click a little bit cleaner for the teams that are actually trying to make the trade work. But I don't see Memphis as part of that. How big of a trade do they make? All of those questions, the toughness of the schedule, the travel, we will know by the end of February just how serious of a contender this Grizzlies team is. If Memphis is below 500 coming out of this stretch of games, I don't know how you pick them to get out of the Western Conference. It's going to be tough to pick them depending on matchup to get out of the first round if they play the way they did against the Knicks. But if this team can find some resilience, if they can build some toughness, if they can utilize the scars that come from games like the one against the Knicks on Monday and pick themselves back up and apply themselves, and they get a great win against the Rockets, it's not like the Knicks game never happens, but you get a little bit more life about you. You beat a team that you're going to have to go through at some point to get to where you want to go in the Western Conference Finals and beyond. It builds confidence. This is a run that will test the confidence and the structure and the preparedness for a postseason stretch of these Memphis Grizzlies. I'm excited to see it. You don't want to watch them beat up on the on the Charlotte Hornets and the Utah Jazz. No disrespect to fans of those organizations. They're not in the place that the Grizzlies claim to be. You want to be a contender? Let's see it. Don't talk to me. Show me. And show Grizzlies fans that you are in a position, whether it's via trade, with the roster that you currently have, to compete. Thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. As I mentioned a moment ago, there will not be a Wednesday episode of the show, barring some trade. If Memphis makes a move, of course, we will do an episode to respond to that. But if things stand pat, We will take Wednesday off. We will be back with you on Thursday to preview Grizzlies Rockets, talk about whatever happened at practice. DeMichael will be back with me. Make sure you're with us on Thursday, barring some sort of major move from Memphis that warrants another episode coming up here on Wednesday. But again, Thursday is the next planned episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts. We're proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make sure you're with us each and every time an episode drops. And make sure you're checking out our free daily newsletter. There will be a Wednesday newsletter, LockedOnDaily.com. Again, it's free, in your inbox daily, NBA content, fantasy basketball advice, and written words from me on the Memphis Grizzlies each and every single time a newsletter comes out. I'm Joe Mullinax. Until next time, stay locked in. It's okay to criticize your team. You can be a fan, you can be a supporter, and still want more. You expect more. Hopefully we get more from the Grizzlies next time out.